And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to be taking a look at Hamburgum by Rio Grande Games. This is a Euro-style board game which uses the rondel mechanism in order to have players taking different actions, which they're going to use in order to try and build buildings, contribute to churches, and earn victory points through the buying and selling of goods and various other ways. It'll play in about an hour and a half for 2 to 5 players, less time, and is just a classic type of Euro game. So real quick, why don't we take a look at what you get inside of that very large box. We'll take a look at the gameplay of the game, and then I'll come back here and give you my final opinions on it. So here you can see everything you get with Hamburgum, and I realize this is very far zoomed out. It's because this is a very large game board. But I'm going to cover the concept real quick, and then we'll go over different areas to show you how the game's going to work. You're going to have this large board that depicts the city of Hamburgum. These are all going to be different districts, which are denoted by different churches, which you're going to be contributing to in order to build buildings around them. On your right here, you'll see all of these different buildings. You have council buildings and cloth makers, sugar makers, breweries, captains, and merchants, which are going to be different types of buildings you can build in areas where you've contributed to churches. You'll see the big point scoring track around the board, and then down at the bottom here, you'll see these different tiles, which are going to be tiles you get for contributing to churches, which will either give you bonus points or multipliers to different ways of scoring points throughout the game. On your left-hand bottom side here, you're going to see a track for keeping track of the values of different types of goods, which are going to be beer, sugar, and cloth, and how much they'll sell for if you decide to trade them using your ships, which will be in these different little areas for your ships here, denoting how many they can sell. On the side here, you'll see a depot depicting how much goods are going to cost if you decide to buy different goods, which would be wood or brick. You'll see them here. And then you're going to have this rondel mechanism, and this is going to be the central focus of the game. You're going to be moving a pawn around this in order to take different actions. These big wooden markers are going to be churches that you'll be placing on the board when the churches are complete. And then over to the far right here, you'll see the different various components you have for playing. So you're going to have different types of money. You're going to have all the goods that I showed you. You'll have these little church bells, which are going to be important for contributing to the final levels of the church. You'll have the different goods cubes, and then each player is going to have discs for showing their contributions to the churches, citizens for placing out on the board when they build different buildings, some goods cubes that they'll start with, and then there's ships that they may build onto the board. So as I mentioned, the whole game focuses around this rondel mechanism, and each player is going to have a pawn at the center at the start of the game, and they're going to be moving their pawn onto these actions in order to take them. And basically your turn will consist of moving your pawn and taking one action. So why don't we go over what the actions do real quick. Cloth, you can see here, if I were to place my token on cloth, would allow me to produce cloth. And at the beginning of the game, each player is going to have a base production of 1 cloth, but as they build the cloth maker buildings that you can see here, they're going to have higher production of cloth. So eventually, if you have one of these, you get 2 cloth instead of the base 1. Moving on to the guild hall is going to allow you to build buildings. So that building I just showed you could be built using the guild hall if you were to pay 1 wood and 1 brick. So you can see the wood and the brick here. I could return those to the supply, and I could choose any one of the buildings to be built out there. Now, the caveat being that when you build a building, you have to place it next to a church where you have already made a donation. And we'll get into donations momentarily. Placing on beer would produce beer. And like I said, you're going to have a base production of 1 beer, but if you build the beer building, you're going to have another production, and more beer buildings will give you more production. Moving on to trade is going to be a way to sell either the goods that you're making, which are beer, sugar, and cloth, or a way to buy resources from the supply, which are going to be those stones, bricks, and the church bells that I showed you earlier, which will be useful for making donations or for building different buildings like I just showed you. So the first option on this spot is to sell goods. And when you sell goods, you're going to be selling them according to the price that you see here on this different chart. And so at the beginning of the game, each beer, sugar, and cloth will sell for 100 money apiece. Whereas as you build the different buildings, which correspond to the production of these different goods, the price will go down throughout the game. The second option on this spot is going to be to buy goods from the supply. Buying goods follows this chart that you can see here on the depot, and the number of goods that you want to buy is going to correspond with the number of money or amount of money you have to pay. So buying 1 good costs you 20 money, 2 will cost you 50, and you'll see the price goes up from there. When buying, you can buy any combination of wood, brick, or church bells. The next spot, the dockyard, is going to be a place where you can build boats, placing them into the dockyard. When a player builds on the dockyard by paying their different wood that they want to pay, they're going to put ships out into the highest numbered of these different areas. Now, each area can only hold 3 ships, so when a 4th ship is placed, all of the 3 ships that are already there, if there are 3 ships, are going to shift to the next area. This is important because when you are selling goods, you may only sell as many types of goods as there are boxes in the area you're in, or the number. So for example, this green ship can sell 2 goods of the same type, while this green ship can sell 3. When you place on the sugar spot, you're simply going to produce sugar, and you have the base production of 1 sugar, and for each sugar refinery that you've built, you will get an additional sugar. The final spot, the church spot, is going to be for contributing to churches, which is going to get you positions on the board where you can build out your different buildings. Going to the church spot, as I said, allows you to make contributions, and you can make anywhere from 1 to 5 contributions to the same church on a turn. The first contribution will cost you a brick as long as no one has already contributed there, and you would pay the brick to the supply, and then you would take one of your discs and you would put it out on the appropriate church on the board. If you wanted to contribute a second time, it would cost you a brick and a timber. A third time would cost you 20 money, a brick and a timber. A fourth, 40 money, a brick and a timber. And the 5th time would cost you $10 times your number of citizens on the board, a brick, a timber, and a church bell. Now, finishing these churches is going to give you bonus victory points and give you tiles for contributing to them. So as you contribute, let's say I contributed to the purple church here, I would get a 5 victory point tile, which I could use at any time on one of my church turns in order to get 5 points. And then subsequently, each contribution you will have an option. I could get one that gives me 5 times the amount of captain buildings I have, or 4 times the amount of citizens I have in the area, or 2 times the number of ships that I currently have out in the dockyard. And so you're going to be able to try and contribute to these different churches in order to get different bonus victory point tiles to flip them over for victory points at a future point on one of your turns. So as I showed, when you contribute to a church, you will place one of your discs out on the appropriate church. So let's say I contributed to the purple church, I would put a disc out on that spot. This allows me to, when I take the guild hall action, build buildings that are adjacent to this spot. So we went over guild hall, but when I, for example, built a cloth maker building, I would keep this building in front of me, I would have additional cloth production, but I would place one of my citizens out on one of the adjacent cloth maker spots. And you're only allowed to build or put your citizens out on spots that are adjacent either to a church where you have contributed or to one of your already placed citizens. The game is going to go on until all 5 of these churches have been completed, and a church is completed when it's been contributed to 5 times. So if 5 contributions were made to this church, whoever placed the last contribution would take the church model for that spot, place it on there, and earn victory points equal to the numbers on the church track, which you can't see, but they decrease, starting with the first church at 8, and they go down as you build more churches. When all 5 churches are built, the game will end, and you'll calculate your final victory points. The player who has the most final victory points will be the winner. And there you have the gameplay of Hamburgum. Now, I was a little surprised by this game. It's not as heavy as I thought it was going to be from looking at the box, looking at the components and the map. It's actually a relatively light to mid-weight Euro game with that nice rondel mechanism, which I'm a pretty big fan of. It's very simplistic. You simply place your pawn and take your action on your turn, and there may be a few extra little things that you can do in addition to taking your action, but for the most part, move a pawn, take an action. I failed to go over this in the video, but you can actually pay victory points to move your pawn further. Usually you can use the pawns to move 1 to 3 spaces on the rondel, but if you pay victory points, you can actually move additional spaces equal to the number of victory points you pay. So there is a give and take in scoring victory points and using victory points to get the appropriate actions at the right time in order to score even more victory points. For the negatives of the game, in my opinion, it's a little lighter than I would like it to be. But other than that, I'd say it's a pretty well-designed, well-thought-out, medium-weight Euro game. If that's the kind of thing you're interested in, I definitely suggest checking out Hamburgum. I think it might be something you'd really enjoy.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find the latest board game news at Dicetowernews.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Fun Again Games, the world's best game source. Fun Again Games has over 5,000 games available. Check them out at funagain.com.